Hi there, Smart Drivers. Rick with Smart Drive Test, talking to you today about air brakes in the state of New York for the purpose of getting a CDL, a commercial driver's license. Had a comment from Nate. He was having some difficulty understanding air brakes, and that's little doubt. In terms of getting a driver's license, the air brakes is the most technical and the most difficult for students to understand. There's a lot of information that you need to know, and the state of New York, like many other jurisdictions here in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario,